The last prophecy, the story's end. And then, when all hope is lost for the tale, the final tragedy unveils. To save the worlds, there is only one way. The dragon must be slain, as a final price to pay. Only then will the worlds be saved. This idea seems impossible, but it makes sense and it has always made sense. Let's start from the beginning. I'm not going to waste your time, so I won't add unnecessary filler in this video. Ralsei is, in essence, a spin on the classic tutorial character that guides you along the way. He knows of game mechanics, and, most importantly, knows about the prophecy. His dialogue would reflect his knowledge, even if indirectly. Assuming Susie really is destined to be killed, what are the hints that this will happen? First of all, I should clarify the common theories for what the tragedy in the last prophecy actually is. Either it's Castletown being sealed away forever, or it's Ralsei sacrificing himself specifically. It's only fair if I take these interpretations in mind for this video. In Chapter 3, Ralsei tells Susie that he's sad that he couldn't be there to help Susie if she needs him, and that Susie should just forget about him and make some real friends instead. When I saw this quote, I thought the conclusion of Ralsei's character was obvious. Inevitably, Ralsei wouldn't be there for Susie because he'd cease to exist. However, I realize that this still fits even with the idea that Susie will die. I'll get back to that later. Regarding the last prophecy, I think it's interesting how Chris, for the most part, is excluded from whatever this tragic event is. The main focus of the last prophecy repeatedly involves Susie and Ralsei specifically, with Chris taking the role of a witness every time. I think there's a reason why Susie and Ralsei's dynamic continues to revolve around the prophecy, which, as you know, is because I think Susie will end up dying. If you look back at Chris's room, you'll notice something extremely important, that the Deltarune symbol is color-coded. The triangle pointing down at the bottom is green, representing Ralsei. The triangle pointing up at the right is cyan, representing Chris. And the triangle pointing up at the left is purple, clearly representing Susie. And what do you see for the final tragedy? A depiction of the Deltarune, where Ralsei and Chris's triangles are the only parts left untouched. Susie's triangle is broken. After Ralsei repeatedly yells for Susie to avoid looking at the last prophecy, he is left apologizing profusely once Susie sees it. Obviously, in this context you can see why Ralsei is afraid of Susie knowing the truth, because by being their guide and not telling Susie what will happen by following the prophecy, he's complicit. The reason why Ralsei is scared of defying the prophecy is because he's scared the result of doing so could be even worse. Even more so, he believes Susie would lash out at him or completely ditch him in response. Susie then tells Ralsei to shut up. In his eyes, this seems to be exactly what he expected from her. However, she begins to laugh and deny what the prophecy says. Like something like that would happen. I wouldn't let it happen. Susie wouldn't let herself be killed like that. Chris wouldn't let it happen. Chris wouldn't let Susie die. And obviously you wouldn't let it happen. Ralsei wouldn't just lead Susie to her death and sit back for it. It's just stupid. When he talked to Ralsei, he says, "She's a really, really nice person, Chris. How can she be so kind? How? Our fate is already decided." The most damning part of this is the fact that Susie's blood is literally on Ralsei's face. I don't think I need to explain that being covered in the blood of another person is a very common trope for indicating somebody's death, mostly for characters who are responsible for said death. This directly depicts that Ralsei is marked for Susie's death, and that Susie's blood will be on his hands, or in this case, on his face. Susie tells Chris, "No matter what, I want to keep being friends with you and Ralsei, despite the fact that it seems their friendship will end in tragedy." And, obviously, the trope of the dragon being slain to restore peace is used in a very creative way here. He says himself that our purpose, darkness' purpose, is to assist them. It's the only way we can feel truly fulfilled. This is why Ralsei feels he carries such a burden. He fully believes this, but knows he'll have to do the exact opposite of what he seems to be meant for. A Darkener will have to guide a Lightener to her death. I believe that's why Ralsei acts in such a guilty manner, to the point where he doesn't feel like a friend. This also completely recontextualizes what Ralsei means when he wants us to get by without fighting. If we can manage to do that, I believe this tale may have a happy ending. Otherwise, I fear that you may not find the result favorable. If the unfavorable result didn't involve some sort of violence being committed, why else would Ralsei focus on avoiding violence specifically? But obviously, there's the big question I haven't mentioned yet. Why? While I can't answer that with certainty, I do believe in a specific general idea, and that involves asking what dragons represent in the first place. In most fiction, dragons have a dark interpretation of being destroyers, hoarders, and bringing about chaos. This is what Susie started off as in Chapter 1. the ultimate stereotype in essence. It's clear Susie feels a lot of resentment and isolation, especially from her story about being excluded from playing the piano. She was treated as if she didn't belong, and as a result, she started playing the part. But through kindness, he managed to veer Susie away from said stereotype. I believe this short character arc she experiences in chapter 1 is foreshadowing what her grand conclusion will be, and why it's so tragic. We don't know what she'll do, but she's destined by the prophecy itself to be in this dark role where she must die to restore peace. That, despite the fact she grew as a person, the world itself is saying she doesn't belong. In this context, Ralsei sees her development in chapter 1 as proof kindness can change the prophecy, but then his naive hope is crushed upon realizing nothing changed. With what you know now, I'll bring this scene up again. Susie. She's a really nice person, Chris. How can she be so kind? How? I thought if I said something different, if we did something different, if we were just kind enough, perhaps by the time we got here, it would change. That being said, do I think this will happen? I do believe that the main ending of Deltarune will be unapologetically emotional, just like the neutral ending of Undertale. For reference, this is what Falawi says in the neutral ending. As a parallel, I think we will have the chance to reach a different outcome, similar to how the neutral ending of Undertale is subverted by the pacifist ending. I believe the means to do so involve the secret bosses in some way. Is it really a coincidence that all the talk about defying fate is from the secret boss route specifically? If Susie is destined to die, everything about Gerson and Susie's dynamic is completely recontextualized. Gerson is dead, and Susie is destined to die. Gerson says he sees a story lit up in Susie's eyes, like fire from a dragon. Burning bright, burning black, burning up everything. Why would Gerson hint that Susie could potentially cause a world-ending destruction? The bells are ringing, and it's a poetic expression that you hear bells ringing before you die. Gerson asks Susie, "How do you think it all ends?" No, how do you want it to end? Susie responds with, "If I could choose, I guess, I wouldn't have an ending." The most important part here, the part I think is key, is Gerson's dialogue about overriding the dark. A white pen, known as hope. While dragons in fiction tend to have that dark interpretation I mentioned earlier, I believe the true ending of Deltarune will be a reinterpretation of that. Dragons do have an alternate interpretation. They can also be seen as creatures of power, authority, and balance. In the true ending, I believe Susie will complete a character arc by completely breaking free from the dark interpretation forced on her, something that's been building up from the very beginning of the story. This is the theory I've had about 30 minutes after I completed Deltarune Chapter 4. To be fair, I should compare the other interpretations of the last prophecy and see how they fit in contrast. Regarding the idea of Castletown being sealed away forever, a good amount of points don't fit. Some examples being Susie's extreme emotional reaction, Ralsei's extreme reaction even though he already feels as completely hopeless for darkness from the beginning, Susie's part of the Deltarune symbol being broken specifically, and that Ralsei believes kindness specifically will stop whatever's coming. I do think something like Castletown being sealed away is inevitable though, at least in Deltarune's main ending. It just won't be the big tragedy that's mentioned in the last prophecy. These issues extend to the idea of Ralsei dying too. Ralsei clearly shows a lack of self-respect, and I don't think he's built up enough self-esteem to have such an extreme drive to stop Susie from knowing the truth about his fate. You can already see that Ralsei is, for the most part, hopeless when it comes to himself. Before I finish this video, I should give my final thoughts on points I'm sure you're thinking of. Even though Gerson only tells Susie she is a dragon in the secret boss route, I think the actual description, or at least the imagery in the last prophecy, is clear enough for Susie to figure it out, even for someone like her who struggles putting 2 and 2 together. The only part I'm unsure about is who will kill Susie specifically. I could see the last prophecy being something more ambiguous like, the hero slayed a dragon, as a final price to pay, or even my very first version of the theory, which was, the knight slays a dragon, as the final price to pay. I originally believed this because it fit the trope perfectly, and also because it was ambiguous whether it would be the Roaring Knight or Chris. If this does happen, then Susie is most likely not the girl mentioned in the prophecy as she's completely excluded here. When it comes to if Susie is indeed the girl mentioned in the prophecy or not, I believe that the role is left ambiguous on purpose, whether it's Susie or possibly Noelle. Susie is clearly looking for something in the prophecy that is specifically her without a doubt, something more than just the girl. Which makes it all the more tragic once Susie does find something undeniable about her in the prophecy. The reason why I'm leaning towards Susie not being the girl is because each part of the prophecy usually has some sort of twist that's negative. The cage doesn't reflect Chris's value as a person, it's dehumanizing. The prince doesn't reflect Ralsei's actual value as a person, even though he knows everything from start to finish. He's a person beyond his purpose. The prophecy is clearly a meta-commentary for how characters and stories are reduced to mere stereotypes, and in this case, the girl is a reference to how stories treat female characters as nothing more than that, just a girl. That's why I do think Noelle is meant for this role instead of Susie. She's clearly depicted as this damsel in distress despite the fact there's more to her than that. The weird root makes this even more obvious. Noelle is reduced to just the girl you can manipulate, use up and disregard once their purpose is fulfilled. Chris's character revolves around being controlled. Ralsei's character revolves around what it means to have value. If Susie is really meant for this role, Susie would just be the girl. And that's especially boring, since fighting back against sexist tropes isn't a pivotal part of her character. Her character revolves around discrimination and completing a self-fulfilling prophecy as a result of said discrimination. It's acceptance that pulls Susie away from that cycle. All things considered, I do believe Susie could also still fit this role in the prophecy, just that Susie would be more of a rogue piece that's taking Noelle's original spot, assuming the prophecy does work as long as the interpretation fits, which is something that's been foreshadowed by Gerson. The words on a wall called you a hero. Whatever you end up being, I'm sure it'll be tremendous. To summarize my entire theory and why I feel like it fits, the last prophecy focuses on Ralsei and Susie. Ralsei desperately doesn't want Susie to know. The prophecy depicts the element of the Deltarune logo that represents Susie being broken as the final tragedy, which is extremely important. Susie thinks what's in the prophecy is so absurd that it's impossible and stupid. Susie is seen as a dragon, which has a dark interpretation. It's implied Susie will become a threat, to the point where she must be slain like a beast to restore balance. Ralsei believes kindness will stop the last prophecy from happening, and he becomes hopeful after seeing it work on Susie, the dragon, in chapter 1. But then Ralsei's hope is crushed all over again upon realizing nothing changed anyway. Ralsei is worried that Susie is mad, or will lash out at him as a result, which almost seems like the case when Susie tells Ralsei to shut up. Susie says that Ralsei specifically wouldn't let that happen. Ralsei's left questioning how Susie could be so kind, but will still have to be killed regardless. Ralsei literally has Susie's blood on his face. The dynamic between Susie and Gerson is recontextualized with the last prophecy marking her for death. Susie literally says herself that if she had a choice, she wouldn't have an ending. Gerson tells Susie that he sees her burning up everything, at least metaphorically. Everything about Susie's relationship with death is recontextualized. Susie will end up following in Gerson's footsteps, just not in the way you'd expect. I think this isn't just interesting for Susie as a character, but perfectly fits with the established narrative. The prophecy is meant to make the characters feel like they have no purpose other than what it dictates. Chris is just a cage, Ralsei is just a guide, Noelle is just a girl, and Susie is just a beast. At the beginning of chapter 1, it makes sense Susie would end up as this force of destruction mentioned in the prophecy, but she changes for the better. Just for it to remain defined that Susie will end up this way, regardless of the fact she changed. So for my final conclusion, I think the last prophecy 100% intends for Susie to be slain, in a way that paints her as a beast. The only problem I see with this theory is the current lack of compelling reason for Susie to become such a threat, but that's clearly because we're only 4 chapters in. If that reasoning alone is enough for you to think this theory is impossible, then you're not alone. Susie agrees too. If you want to see more content like this, check out my Roaring Night theory, which is created in a very similar style as this video is. I'll probably make even more videos like this soon, so subscribe if you're interested. I'll leave any additional information about my theory in the comment section.